I know it sounds ridiculous, but it actually does, or at least it helps me just hear the character.
Hello, this is Louise Dean, founder of the Novelry, the world's best-loved school for writers, with more 5-star reviews than any other and a whole bunch of published success stories. As an award-winning Booker-listed author, I founded the Novelry to help writers avoid the frustrations of writing solo for years by getting wise eyes on the most important element of writing right from the get-go. Story, story, story. And this is our podcast to give you everything you need for happy writing. This is the Novelry on Writing.
Hi, my name is Tara Conklin. I'm a New York Times bestselling novelist, and I'm a writing coach here at the Novelry.
And hi, I'm Nic Caws. I'm a senior editor here at the Novelry, and I work on romance, uplit, and historical books.
Okay, we're here today, Nic, to talk about writing dialogue.
We're having a dialogue about dialogue.
You're
you
right,
might
we
say.
are. That's very clever. You must be an editor. I really love writing dialogue now after many, many years of really struggling with it. But I feel like I've maybe finally figured out how to do it and to make it fun.
What did you struggle with when you were starting out?
That leads very nicely into tip number one,
Ah.
which I like to call the dialogue conundrum, which is I was trying to recreate actual speech, which,
Right.
in kind of a verbatim way, which is actually what you should not do when writing on the page.
Yeah, I think it's something as an editor I see a lot. It's that I think it's quite a common early mistake where you think, yes, I need to be writing dialogue as people say it in real life.
Yeah.
But the dialogue needs to sound natural, but not exactly
Yeah.
how people speak.
That's exactly where I kind of tripped up, is I was trying to sound natural and have my characters speak like real people, but there's so much filler and so much unnecessary words, verbiage that we use on a daily basis in our everyday conversations. And when you're writing a novel, like every line should have a purpose, right?
Are you talking about things sort of filler words, things that we say sort of like kind of, or
Yeah.
Or are you talking about, the starts of conversations that people say, like, hello,
Yeah.
how
Both.
are you?
Both.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they are both common things that I know as an editor I've seen a lot of. But
Yeah.
I think often it's a case of just taking out more, isn't it? Than, getting that red pen and crossing out those unnecessary filler lines, and the starts and starts and ends of conversation.
Yeah.
And getting to the real meat of what your characters are trying to talk about.
Yes. Which is a very nice segue into tip number 2, which is focusing on the speaker's intent and what they want to do with the language that they're delivering. And one thing I like to do is to sort of give my speaker an agenda. Like there's something that they want to achieve in this dialogue, whether it's flirting or asking for money, but not coming right out and saying it. But the trick of it, and for me, the fun of it, is to not be too on the nose, like exactly explicitly what you want this character to say.
Writers often can think, okay, this character is angry. They'll be speaking in a really angry manner, which means they might be, loud or shouting or saying really angry words. But sometimes anger can come across in that, really quietly, that sort of quiet, really controlled way that a character is speaking, and that will come across in what they're saying, but it will also come across in how they're saying it. So
that's where you get into sort of the subtext of language,
right,
and how just short little bits of dialogue can really convey a lot, and you can give your your reader sort of the benefit of the doubt that they will be able to pick up what the subtext is in a conversation.
Yes, because it's so much about what's not being said as well. It's that sort of space around, we as editors talk about that sort of space around the dialogue.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what they're doing, when they're pausing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the glances they're giving each other. So it's not always just about the words themselves. It's sort of, it's what you can convey in the blank spaces as well.
Have you ever read that that really famous Ernest Hemingway short story, Hills Like White Elephants? Do you know that story?
I'm gonna embarrass myself by saying no.
It's famous as being this kind of masterclass in subtext because there are two characters, a man and a woman, and they are basically talking about whether or not the woman should have an abortion.
Right.
But the word pregnancy is never spoken. The word abortion is never spoken. The word, I mean, there's just, it's never said explicitly between the two of them. You don't even really know. It's not even explicitly said that they're in a relationship. And yet the sort of cumulative effect of all of this sideways talking is clearly she's pregnant and he wants her to have an abortion and she doesn't want to have one. And it's, you should go read it after this.
Yes, I definitely should. But it sounds like a brilliant example.
It is.
When it's a novel, it's not like a play, is it? It's not, you know, one character says one thing, then they reply, and, you know, you need to make sure that there is that sort of added context for the reader, and it isn't solely dialogue, which is sort of that floating dialogue effect.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
You can have sort of the sort of context of where they're having a conversation and the pauses, as you mentioned, the space in between the words is almost as important as the words themselves.
Definitely.
That brings us not so elegantly, but still 2.3, which is don't do an info dump when you're writing your dialogue. And I think in movies is probably the most obvious place to see this. And in I always notice it in scripts where it'll be information that one character delivers to another character that is so obviously not something they would actually say, but it's information that the screenwriter thinks that the viewer, the reader needs to have. And so it's, you know, the history of a place or how the heist is going to go down, or, you know, and it just always is so jarring and takes me out of the scene.
Jarring. I'm known to laugh in movies and when I'm watching TV shows with friends, and I'm like, oh great, lots of exposition there. So
do you see exposition delivered in dialogue in romance novels or historical fiction? Is there like one genre where it happens more often?
That's interesting. I'm not sure whether it happens more in one genre or another, but I think it happens most of all in the openings of novels, which are the hardest thing to write anyway, and they change a lot. But I think we always say don't info dump sort of in big paragraphs, but then sometimes that can lead writers to think, okay, well, I'll use dialogue as exposition, but you have to do it in a really subtle way that feels, you know, natural. Otherwise, yes, it comes across as a kind of big flag of, okay, I'm telling you, the reader, something here now.
Very clunky.
Yes.
And or the writer will use it to there'll be a piece of dialogue where information that both parties should already have is being talked about in a way that makes it clear that the reader needs to have this information. But
that's the as you know, Bob dialogue.
That's exactly it. The as you know, ...
Yeah, as you know, this thing happened last week. So yes. Yeah, and I think that it makes you as the reader feel like you're sort of seeing behind the curtain at the theatre. You know, you're seeing all the mechanics and the kind of the pulleys and what's going on in the wings. And you know what? All of that stuff needs to happen. But as the reader, you don't really want to see it, or, you know, and it's the same when you're reading a book. You'd rather not see the mechanics of it. So
that's a good way of putting it, because it's sort of the the awkwardness when you're writing your first draft or when you're a new writer, and you're not
Yeah.
quite sure how to convey this information to the reader. And I think also, certainly when I was starting, I did not give my reader the benefit of the doubt. I felt like I had to explain every piece of backstory and every piece of, emotion, and not leave those spaces in between, and let the reader glean things from a more sort of artful exchange of dialogue between two characters.
And what do you do now in terms of, there's always, you do need to convey information to your reader, don't you? I think that's really tricky. So what do you do now in terms of not putting it in dialogue? Where do you manage to expose things?
Well, one thing is I try and get across information, like the factual information that is only 100% necessary. Backstory information is 100% necessary for the reader to understand the story.
Yeah.
And it is surprising how much I will write pages and pages of backstory on every single one of my characters. But that is purely for me. And then,
Right.
Maybe a character had a childhood illness or something, and I'll write, scenes of them being in the hospital and scenes of them, developing a relationship with a nurse, or like a really nice nurse that was kind to them. But then in the actual book, or in the actual sort of narrative itself, it'll be one line of, oh, I remember Nurse Cassidy, who was so kind to me when I was ill, like, so that that they had an illness, that there was one person who was very important to them and helped them through that illness, but you don't need to know what color the hospital bed sheets were, or like what the sun looked like coming through the window.
No.
So I think it's a matter of just really paring it down.
And one line can say so much, as you say. You can, a simple nod to it can really be enough.
Exactly.
With courses, coaching, and community, the Novelry is the world's top-rated writing course. With our 5-step program, you'll come up with the idea for a novel you can't wait to write, then you'll write a finished draft, and you'll edit your novel into a book that readers will love. A Big 5 publishing editor will review your novel and will take you through to leading literary agencies with our fast-track submission process. So, if you've got a book in you and you've never found the right time to write it, now there's a good place. Come on over to the Novelry. Beginners welcome. We'll show you how to start, coach your story into shape, and cheer you on to type the end.
So Nic, that brings us to point number 4 in our 5 tips for writing dialogue.
Okay.
And this kind of follows on from what we were talking about in conveying information through dialogue, and how you have to be very selective about it. And I think the sort of a really wonderful thing that you can convey through dialogue, and you should really lean into it, is to convey your character and who that person is who is speaking. And their word choice can say so much about who they are, their level of education, their background, or even their value system, how they view the world.
See, it's even something as simple as, for a character, for example, one character might say yes, another character might say yeah. Another character might say yep. Even selecting that sort of difference in dialogue can, it can show so much about a person's age, as you say, kind of level of education perhaps, or just how formal or informal they are, and who they're talking to even.
Exactly.
Someone might say something different to their boss, or they might say, they might speak slightly differently to their mum, for example. So you can show so much about how comfortable perhaps a character is feeling through their dialogue, which is great. It's good fun.
Do you see any sort of common missteps in manuscripts in terms of characterization through dialogue?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when writers are starting out, they're really focused on finding their own writerly voice. That
Yeah.
sort of narrative. Who am I as a writer? How am I going to convey what I want to in my own sort of voice, and not just copy writers that they know and love, which, by the way, is a great place to start, is reading writers that you love and want to sort of emulate. But yes, but sometimes they can forget that every single character needs their own voice and their own way of speaking, and that, you don't want a conversation to sort of sound like it could be the same person talking to themselves in the mirror. You want to make sure that everyone is, sounding as different as they can.
Yeah.
Have got their own intentions and their own motives and their own patterns of speaking.
Exactly. In my second novel, I had 3 sisters, and I really struggled in early drafts to find individual voices for each of them, because they came from the same place. They were all young women in the book. And it really came down to sort of what they wanted out of life. Like, one of them was a doctor and was she was very driven professionally, and she spoke sort of very to the point, very quick. She was always sort of in a rush. Another one was a mom, and she was always kind of distracted by her young children, right? So like, she was never finishing her sentences, and she was always sort of being pulled away to deal with the child. And then the youngest sister was an artist and a poet. And of course, that was the one that was the most fun to write because she always had and she had no children. So she sort of had the focus and the natural lyricism to speak very poetically, and she really took care with how she spoke. But she was very, she used very floral language, very, very elaborate language. But that was really a matter of me developing each of those characters individually, and then using dialogue and their manner of speaking to give us more insight into who they were as characters and as people, and what was important to them.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example, because, as you say, sisters will have grown up, often in similar circumstances. So I think siblings are, that's really interesting to hear the ways you managed to pull them apart. So brilliant.
This is the 5th and final tip for writing dialogue, which is one that I use a lot, which is to read your dialogue aloud. And my kids will always kind of giggle at me because I use funny voices. I try on like if I'm speaking a male character, I'll be like, I'll go very low and use a low voice. And then if it's an old lady, I'll use an old lady voice, and like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it actually does, or at least it helps me just hear the character and feel the authenticity of the language. What do you think about that? Do you think I'm crazy?
No, of course not. I think, it's something we say as editors as well, is, grab a friend.
Yes.
If you're at that point where you feel like you can share it and sort of go through it. And you don't need to read the whole novel out loud, of course, but if there's a particular section of dialogue that you're struggling with, for example, or you're thinking, does this feel natural? Does it sound like something we might, people might say, and is it, having enough purpose? Grab a friend, read through it, take turns, and have some fun. Have some fun with it.
That is always the number one, I think, in writing, is to make sure that you are enjoying the process and you are having fun with it. Because if you are not enjoying the writing and finding it, meaningful for you, then chances are the reader is not going to be enjoying reading it.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
That wraps up our discussion about writing dialogue. Nic, it was such a delight to speak with you today.
It was so much fun. Yeah. Had a great time. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you along for the writing journey, and we hope to see you on another episode of The Novelry on Writing. If you'd like to learn more, visit us at thenovelry.com. From first draft to finished manuscript, at The Novelry you'll enjoy one-to-one coaching from best-selling authors, live writing classes with award-winning authors and literary agents, and you'll work with a publishing editor all the way for submission to literary agents toward a publishing deal. All writers learn from other writers, even the greats. Write your novel in good company. Join us at The Novelry. We'll show you how to start, coax your story into shape, cheer you on to type the end.